The US Federal Reserve this morning moderated its giant-size interest rate rise, but says it's determined to keep lifting rates to kill off persistent inflation. Our business editor Ross Greenwood joins us now. And Ross, is there any guidance here for Australia ahead of the RBA's first rate decision of the year next week?
Oh, you bet there is, Laura. There's no doubt about that. And really the message from the United States is it believes its challenge to overcome inflation is being won, that inflation has peaked there. And even though it's not the end of these rate rises in the United States, that really it is now starting to taper them off. So we can see here late last year, after having 4 consecutive rate rises of 0.75%, the US Federal Reserve raised rates late last year by 0.5%. Now, this time around, they've gone by 0.25%. So you can see this tapering is going on. Now, as I say, it's not the end of the operation. Inflation is not yet dead. And Jerome Powell, the chairman of the US Federal Reserve, basically laid out the reasons for this tapering last night.
We continue to anticipate that ongoing increases in the target range for the federal funds rate will be appropriate in order to attain a stance of monetary policy that is sufficiently restrictive to return inflation to 2% over time.
Yeah, so interesting. The chairman says inflation is coming down, right? So
yep.
What's the justification for continuing to raise rates? That is becoming the same argument you hear here in Australia. We were told that inflation has peaked.
Well, we have been told that, but you've actually got to kill it stone dead. This is like a vampire. The stake's got to go straight through its heart in order for it to be actually done from the economy. Now, the reason why they want the stake in the heart is because they don't want to suddenly have inflation rather than their 2 to 3% target suddenly sitting out there at 5 or 4.5 or somewhere like that, because that's still inflationary and that has a detrimental impact long term on the economy. And so the reason why the rates will continue to rise in the United States and here is because, if you like, the vampire killers of the central banks are trying to kill it. So this was really very much spelled out again by Jerome Powell overnight.
The inflation data received over the past 3 months show a welcome reduction in the monthly pace of increases. And while recent developments are encouraging, we will need substantially more evidence to be confident that inflation is on a sustained downward path. Despite elevated inflation, longer-term inflation expectations appear to remain well anchored, as reflected in a broad range of surveys of households, businesses, and forecasters, as well as measures from financial markets.
You see, Laura, he looks like a vampire hunter, doesn't he?
I guess so. Just trying to think back to Twilight. Yeah, I guess he could be in the cast of Twilight. Who knows? Anyway, let's talk about the RBA. Does it follow the US lead here? After all, it has been criticised for tapering rates to 0.25% rise much earlier, but inflation's still rising here.
Yeah, that's the issue, and that is the big issue for the Reserve Bank here. The problem is the Reserve Bank has always been seen to be late, not only with its raising of interest rates, but then it tapered much earlier than other central banks around the world. We've got a chart, we can show you this here. So this is Australia's rates in blue without this latest rate rise versus the US Federal Reserve. So you can see they were pretty much at the same at the beginning of last year, but you can see the US raised much faster. Inflation did take off faster there. And then you can also see the tapering here in Australia over the last couple of months. And so the real issue here is to whether Australia has actually got interest rates too low. Currently the cash rate at 3.1% versus inflation of 7.8%. You can see in the United States that funds rate, federal funds rate now between 4.5% and 4.75% is certainly much higher than it is here in Australia. So that is the big question as to whether, again, the Reserve Bank has to play catch up. There's a few economists around the place who believe with that outbreak of inflation that we saw just over the last quarter, that really there's an argument for the Reserve Bank to go back to 0.5% rate rises to make certain that they do kill that inflation stone dead.
Right, so how is the market reacting?
Well, it was like a green light to the stock markets. But ahead of this meeting, when the markets were uncertain, the Dow Jones, for example, was down around about 400 points. Now, have a look at how it ended up. It ended up by 0.2 of a percent. So you can see the rebound as soon as that decision was made. And really, if you like, the markets interpreted this as basically the whole question about interest rates was over. So that also plays out into the Aussie stock market today. And we can see it's open just in the last few minutes minutes, the local market here up 0.5%. Right from the get-go, up by 40 points. And all the stocks, the consumer stocks, the banks, all those that are interest rate sensitive, they're the ones that are moving this morning. You can see it in the Australian dollar. So again, even when we go through the Australian dollar, it's also got a bit of a story here, 71.5 US cents. So that's its highest it's been in some 9 months. And that's off the fact that really Australian interest rates are continuing to rise. US interest rates are starting to taper off. So that's an important one. The other one I should tell you about overnight is the stock that owns Facebook. This is Meta. So Meta's been in the doldrums for a long, long time. Have a look at what it's done after hours, up by 19.5% these shares, and that's as a result of a $40 billion stock buyback, which really is going to have a big impact. And this has been, as I say, a company that has struggled for a long time for new subscribers, for advertising, all these things were really the confluence of events, the interest rates, the outlook for the economy, and then also, if you like, its improving performance, and that stock buyback has seen its shares boom overnight.
Interesting. I thought you were going to tell me another celebrity had bought some kind of house in the metaverse or something weird like that. But anyway,
probably right.
It's good. At least it's anchored a little bit more in reality. Lastly, Ross, let me ask you finally about Adani. What a story this has been. It's now dropped. It's controversial. What was it, a share sale?
Yeah, so this is the breaking news. Now, we've been telling you for the last week or so about a report put out by a company called Hindenburg Research. They are short sellers, and they basically have said that Adani is the biggest corporate con in history. Now, the one thing about that was this was timed perfectly to coincide with a $2.5 billion share sale by Adani in India. Now, the reason why they're doing this, and remember Adani owns the controversial Carmichael coal mine in central Queensland. Now, the point about it is that the timing of it and then the subsequent fall in the shares really did play havoc with this share sale, and it was designed to do so. So as a result, the breaking news just in the last few minutes is that share sale has been dumped by Adani, and that really will lay claims to questions about the motivation of Hindenburg, but then also about the veracity of its report and its claims about Adani and its behaviour.
Yeah, right. OK, just quickly before I let you go then, Ross, what does it mean for that Carmichael coal mine? Should Queensland, should Australians more broadly be nervous about Adani's investment in Australia?
Well, I would suggest that not only will the investment community in India, but also around the world, but most likely here in Australia, will be looking at the financial veracity of Adani in the wake of these claims. There is no doubt about that. But also then the due diligence that was done by the Queensland and the federal governments that approved these mines in the very first place. There was always arguments that were generally on environmental grounds about that mine, but then also it's about the ability and the capability of that company to be able to do it. Now, remember that Gautam Adani at one stage, in literally the space of 3 years, had a massive acceleration in his wealth and was listed as the third wealthiest man in Australia. As a result of these share price falls, he's barely in the top 10 right now, if that at all.
Wow.
So this is serious, and this is something that clearly governments here at some point are going to have to investigate as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We should be keeping a very close eye on this story. Ross, thanks so much. Appreciate it.